Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen will have more on markets in a minute. First, a developing story. Taiwan has been hit by its strongest earthquake in 25 years. At least 7 people have been killed, more than 700 injured during the 7.4 magnitude quake on the east of the island. Dozens of buildings were leveled. Bloomberg's Adrian Kennedy is in the capital, Taipei, and begins our team coverage.
Taipei right now is back to normal. There are cars and motorcycles on the street. We're operating from our offices here normally. Taiwan people are pretty resilient. They're used to earthquakes. They're used to severe flooding and typhoons. It's a fairly natural disaster-prone island. On the east coast, that is an area which is more remote. It's cut off from much of the island by mountains. We do have reports of some houses having collapsed. We do have some reports that rescues are being underway for people who may be trapped in those houses.
And Bloomberg's Adrian Kennedy says tsunami warnings were issued in parts of Japan and China, but they were later downgraded.
Well, Nathan, Taiwan has great importance to the global economy. It is the dominant producer of the world's most advanced semiconductors. Bloomberg Intelligence Asia tech analyst Robert Lee continues our team coverage.
Taiwan is the Silicon Valley of Asia. It's at the epicenter of global chip production, with TSMC being at the center of that. So it's a very important place for the global tech food chain, particularly within semiconductors. But as I said, it would appear, and just thinking through and understanding the geography and the protocols and preventative measures in place, that realistically the damage to TSMC's production or plants is likely to be minimal at this point.
Bloomberg Intelligence Asia tech analyst Robert Lee says Taiwan Semiconductor is a major supplier of chips to Apple and NVIDIA. It halted some chip making and evacuated plants following the earthquake.
Now, Karen, another story we continue to follow is the fallout from Israel's killing of aid workers. President Biden has issued his strongest statement of criticism against Israel yet. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has that story.
President Biden says Israel has not done enough to protect civilians in Gaza. This following the killing of 7 World Central Kitchen workers providing aid to Palestinians. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the work they're doing there is extraordinary.
We've spoken directly to the Israeli government about this particular incident. We've urged a swift, a thorough, and impartial investigation to understand exactly what happened.
And the president is now also pushing for an immediate ceasefire as part of a hostage deal. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you. Meanwhile, President Biden had his first call with Chinese President Xi Jinping since their face-to-face encounter in San Francisco last November. We get more from Bloomberg's Enda Curran in Washington.
The call is about stabilizing relations, but that does not mean the competitive strategic edge that has gone away. And of course, the point being there, export controls, investment controls, the race for the U.S. to get back in the game in terms of chip production and EV production and everything else. None of that has been changed or will be changed by this phone call or any other.
And Bloomberg's Enda Curran says the two leaders discuss efforts to force the sale of TikTok in the U.S.
Now, Karen, the latest on the run for the White House. President Biden and former President Donald Trump both added to their delegate counts last night. 4 more states held primaries on Tuesday. The presumptive nominees easily won in New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Wisconsin. Trump picked up 78 to 84% of the Republican vote, while Biden took 83 to 91.5% on the Democratic side.
Well, Nathan, the results may be a foregone conclusion, but they do provide some clues about enthusiasm among base voters. Republican Nikki Haley won at least 11% support in all 4 states. In Connecticut and Rhode Island, at least 11% of Democrats voted uncommitted. And in Wisconsin, almost 9% of Democrats voted uninstructed. Activists have been encouraging Democrats to vote against the president to protest his handling of the war in Gaza.
All right, now let's turn to the economy, Karen. Investors are going to be looking for more clues on interest rates later today when Fed Chair Jay Powell speaks at an economic forum at Stanford University. We get a preview from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
The Fed chairman is the central banking version of E.F. Hutton. When he talks, people listen. And he's talking for a second time in a week, offering another look at his economic outlook. Last week, Powell helped turn market sentiment by arguing the Fed is in no hurry to lower interest rates. Central bankers see unexpected strength in the U.S. economy that might boost inflation. Powell is not going to change that view today, but investors will be listening for any nuances that might give them more clarity on the criteria for easing, if not the timing. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thank you. And stay with Bloomberg for live coverage of Jay Powell's remarks. We'll have it for you at noon Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and television.
Nathan, ahead of Powell's speech, more Fed officials are cautioning about beginning the rate cut cycle. Two officials, including San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly, say they still expect 3 rate cuts this year, but there's no rush to begin lowering borrowing costs.
I think that is a very reasonable baseline, but I would like to say here that this is a projection, right? 3 rate cuts is a projection, and a projection is not a promise.
San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly's sentiments were echoed by Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester.
Now we have some breaking news from the Fed, Karen, involving global climate risk rules for Wall Street banks. Bloomberg News has learned U.S. regulators led by the Fed have thwarted a push to make climate risk a focus of global financial rules. European central bankers have been advocating for the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision to agree on requiring lenders to disclose strategies for meeting green commitments. But sources say in closed-door meetings, U.S. officials have cited their narrow mandate and concerns that the Basel Committee was overstepping its purpose.
Well, in company news, Nathan, a costly months-long proxy battle for control of Disney appears to be over. And we get this story from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
And Karen, Walt Disney has secured enough shareholder votes to fend off a challenge from Nelson Peltz's Trian Fund Management. This was the latest test for CEO Bob Iger, who returned to the helm in November of 2022. Reuters reported as of last night, Disney had the votes to defeat Trian's attempt to appoint Peltz and one of his allies to the board. Bloomberg earlier reported that Disney won the support of major investors like Vanguard, BlackRock, and T. Rowe Price. Trian had pushed for changes to management and strategy in an effort to improve what it saw as years of poor performance. Peltz had received the backing of an influential shareholder advisory firm and a group of business leaders. Even Elon Musk, who doesn't own Disney shares, backed Peltz. Disney spent millions of dollars on advertising to garner support for its position. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. Well, Disney shares are a little changed this morning. It is the best performing stock in the Dow this year, up 36%. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Today, a federal judge in Newark will hear oral arguments in New Jersey's lawsuit over New York's congestion pricing tolls. The new toll would charge most drivers $15 for passenger cars driving south of 60th Street in Manhattan. New Jersey is arguing the Federal Highway Administration and New York, quote, failed to adequately consider the environmental impacts and ignored the significant financial burden being placed on New Jerseyans and New Jersey transportation system. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, who is against congestion pricing, says you are not eliminating pollution, you are just displacing it from Manhattan to New Jersey. However, New York City Comptroller Brad Lander is a supporter of congestion pricing. Lander told Bloomberg he's sympathetic to small business owners who say this will be an added expense, but
you've just got to think about the city as a whole. Everyone will thrive better if customers can get to you faster, if the city itself can keep its mass transit strong, if congestion is reduced. That was a fair process to consider exemptions. Of course, people want more of them. I totally understand. But from the point of view of long-term investment in the city, this makes sense.
Congestion pricing is scheduled to start in June. In Baltimore, the Army Corps of Engineers is getting a closer look at the massive cargo ship that brought the Francis Scott Key Bridge down and the damage caused. Army Corps of Engineers Brigadier General John Lloyd says divers are still working in low visibility and hazardous conditions on the bridge wreckage.
The same complexity and challenges, even more so, are below the water as well. And I think that's what's going to make it such a challenge in removing this wreckage. It's not only what you see above the water, but below the water as well.
2 channels have been opened near the site of the collapsed bridge in Baltimore Harbor to make way for smaller vessels. The Justice Department special counsel prosecuting former President Donald Trump for mishandling classified documents vented frustration with the judge overseeing the case. Special Counsel Jack Smith says U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon's understanding of key legal issues appears to be fundamentally flawed. In a court filing late yesterday, Smith called on Cannon to clarify her intentions so he can decide whether to file an appeal to contest her decisions. Cannon ordered Smith and Trump last month to draft instructions for the jury that will hear the case. The order is controversial because it directed Smith to assume that Trump may have had the right to declare the documents are personal rather than official. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John.
Thanks, Karen. The Yankees had to lose sometime after starting 5-0. They managed just 3 hits, lost 7-0 at Arizona. D-backs scored 3 runs on 5 hits in the first inning. Nestor Cortez's second straight start, where he's allowed 3 in the first. Day game today. Yanks have their home opener on Friday. Red Sox won 5-4 in 11 innings at Oakland. Giants lost to the Dodgers 5-4. Mookie Betts with already his 5th home run for L.A. In Philadelphia, Bryce Harper didn't have a hit this season, then had a big night against Cincinnati.
Suter comes set in the 3-2 pitch. Swing and a drive. Well hit up the alley, right center field, and it is gone. A grand slam. 3 for number 3 is Bryce Harper with his 3rd home run of the night.
On WIP, 3 homers, 6 RBIs for Harper. The Phillies won 9-4. Mets and Tigers rained out at Citi Field to make it up with a day game tomorrow. They'll hope to get tonight's game in. In Miami, Knicks fell behind by 16, rallied to tie, but the Heat prevailed 109-99. The Knicks' 3rd loss in a row. Dante DiVincenzo led them with 31. In Philly, the return of Joel Embiid out since January with a knee injury. He played 29 minutes, scored 24 in a Sixers win over Oklahoma City. The Warriors beat Dallas despite 30 points and a triple-double for Luka Doncic. Pittsburgh Penguins, after the win over the Rangers, went to Jersey, beat the Devils 6-3. Islanders topped Chicago 2-1. The Bruins won 3-0 at Nashville. The Capitals lost 6-2 in Buffalo. Seton Hall had a case for making the NCAA tournament. The Pirates had a win over mighty UConn. They settled for the NIT, and in Indianapolis, they beat Georgia. They'll play Indiana State tomorrow for the championship. Ratings in for the Iowa-LSU women's game. 12.3 million people watched. That's more than any recent World Series game. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. S&P futures down at 0.1%. Dow futures little change. NASDAQ futures down 0.2%. And the 10-year Treasury yield 4.37%.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. Let's get back to our top stories. Now, Taiwan is reeling from its strongest earthquake in a quarter century, and President Biden is delivering his harshest criticism yet against Israel following the Gaza attack that killed 7 aid workers with World Central Kitchen. Joining us for more is Rosalind Matheson, Europe, Middle East, and Africa News Director for Bloomberg News. Roz, thanks for being with us. First, catch us up on the latest from this Taiwan earthquake.
Hi there. Well, yes, it was the biggest earthquake to hit Taiwan in 25 years. And the footage obviously shows a pretty strong trembler affecting buildings and so on. There's been quite a lot of damage to buildings on the eastern side of Taiwan. We know at least 4 people have died in that. Luckily, Taiwan has buildings that are quite resistant to earthquakes. So even though there's a lot of damage to buildings, it does seem as though 4 people so far have been killed. But also, key thing is the impact of the earthquake on the island's tech sector, because the chip companies there really are the beating heart of the global supply chain when it comes to semiconductors, particularly the top shelf stuff, the really high-end precision-made semiconductors. And we know that companies including TSMC, the main contract chip maker to companies like Apple, NVIDIA, and others, they've had to shut a lot of their production down. That's because they use very, very delicate equipment that operates at certain vibrations. And obviously an earthquake can do significant damage to their machinery. And this is not stuff you can turn off and then turn back on again straight away. So even if their buildings are not damaged, they can't restart their equipment potentially for weeks. It has to idle before it can be brought back online. And so what we can expect is potentially at least some disruption to chip production and certainly to the supply chain, even if there's a lot of physical damage to these facilities. But right now, we don't know for sure the extent of that.
So how much disruption could we expect, Roz, if we see more aftershocks coming off the back of this 7.4? That's a strong magnitude.
Well, that's right. And either way, we know that these sites are going to have to operate in what's called a vacuum state for several weeks. So you have to turn this equipment off. You have to let it sit for several weeks, and then only then can you restart it. So either way, there's going to be a gap of some magnitude. And that's particularly, again, going to affect the high-end area of the chip market, where those chips might have been destroyed in the process. They might be spoiled. And then again, there's going to be a lag to reproduce them. Of course, there is a backlog of chips that can be used. So you may not see an immediate effect on the supply chain. It might actually come in a matter of months down the line when those extra chips that are currently available run out. And that's what we really need to watch for, is the potential impact on the supply chain months from now. But it does show, again, just how reliant the global supply chain is on Taiwan, and vulnerable to disruptions that come from there. And beyond this moment, this disaster that's affected Taiwan, there is an overarching question also of the tensions with China. And of course, China has vowed to unify Taiwan. It sees Taiwan as part of its territory. Taiwan sees itself as the opposite. So there's the question there of further disruptions down the line.
And of course, we heard President Biden have that phone call with China's Xi Jinping to try to stabilize that relationship. But in our last 30 seconds, Roz, we're hearing some really harsh criticism from President Biden now against Israel following that strike in Gaza that killed World Central Kitchen workers.
Well, that's right. Some of the most strong language that we've seen so far from the US president, and just really reflecting that growing sense of frustration on the part of the US and other countries about the humanitarian situation inside Gaza, and particularly what's been done to protect not just aid workers, but also Palestinian civilians who are inside Gaza. We know that tens of thousands of them have died as part of this conflict. And so really the question is, what can they do to improve things on the ground? Also, what does it mean for the potential invasion of Rafah in the south?
Right. Okay. Roz Matheson, Europe, Middle East, and Africa News Director for Bloomberg News. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.